Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So, let's begin. My name is Adrian. When a spouse of 10 years looks across a room, meets the gaze without flinching, and says, "I want a divorce," something inside shifts, whether readiness exists or not. In my case, the strange thing is that part of me was ready already, even if the exact moment caught me off guard. The words landed suddenly, but the reality beneath them hadn't. I had been living in a quiet separation long before she spoke it out loud. She probably expected me to stall, to bargain, to at least ask why. All I did was breathe once and say, "Okay." She couldn't have known I'd already let go in the ways that matter most. Leading up to that evening, I had been running on fumes. I was covering for a coworker on vacation, and the days stretched longer than they should. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the only images that made sense were peeling off a damp work shirt, standing under hot water, and dropping into bed without a word. I'd grabbed a burger and fries on the way home, no text, to ask if Selena wanted anything. Not because of neglect, but because I already knew the answer. For months, dinner, if it happened at all, had been a silent obligation. She'd stopped cooking. I'd stopped asking. Our exchanges had shrunk into the kind of logistical talk two colleagues share when forced to sit in the same cubicle. It had been a long time since that house felt like a home, and not just a place our things slept. I stepped through the door, and she appeared from the living room. "Hey, we need to talk," she said. That sentence is a stopper for any husband. It halted me mid-motion. In recent weeks, she'd barely met my eyes. I'd ask how the day went and get a muted "fine" delivered without looking up from her phone. I'd been arriving to a mute room, and suddenly a conversation mattered. Still wearing shoes, tie loosened, I muttered, "Can I just take a quick shower first? It's been a long day." She shook her head once. "No, this can't wait." That was that. I dropped the keys into the bowl by the door, turned toward her slowly, and braced for what followed. She stood opposite me with folded arms, an unreadable face, and said, "I think we need a divorce." I didn't reply at first, not because the words hadn't registered, but because I needed a heartbeat to understand how she could be that composed while dismantling something we'd spent a decade building brick by brick. She continued, laying out reasons. The marriage felt lifeless, like we were running on schedule instead of connection. She said intimacy had gone missing, that we didn't meet each other in the ways we used to, that we were strangers under one roof. Maybe some of that was true, but the part that hooked me was the way she framed it as a mutual drift, a gentle slide neither of us controlled. That didn't match the reality I lived. What she labeled a lack of intimacy had become a lever something used like a switch. Each time I didn't sign off on an impulsive spending spree, punishment arrived quiet and immediate. Cold shoulders, turned backs, long weeks of rejection. I'd explained gently at first that the budget was tight, that caution mattered, that we needed to be careful. She didn't want careful. She wanted yes. When she didn't get it, I became the villain of the week. Her tantrums weren't loud. They were precise and cutting, delivered through passive-aggressive lines every time a door opened. So when she blamed our decay on some hazy, mutual loss of spark, I felt her rewriting the history with herself as the neglected party. I asked, "Do you really believe we're beyond repair? Is divorce the only way forward?" She didn't hesitate. She nodded. Then she crossed to a drawer, pulled out a manila envelope, and handed it to me. Divorce papers already filled in, just waiting for my signature. I didn't beg. I didn't try to sell a different story. I looked at her, and suddenly didn't recognize the person I was seeing, and maybe I hadn't recognized her for a long while. I picked up the envelope and walked quietly to the bedroom. I needed that bath more than ever. In the bathroom, every simple action felt heavy with everything that had been stacking up. As the water warmed, fogging the mirror and softening the edges, I stepped in and let heat hit my back. I closed my eyes and let thoughts finally move. Inside the sound of water on tile, I replayed the parts I'd been ignoring. We used to talk about everything, the small and the big, the future and the now. Lately, words only arrived to correct or to argue. Somewhere along the line, the connection snapped, and we kept walking out of habit. I remembered one fight that never stopped echoing. I suggested couples therapy. She didn't even glance at me before laughing and saying, "You think I want to sit in a room and talk about our problems like some pathetic housewife?" The mocking tone shrank me in a way I didn't know how to explain at the time. Something inside me dimmed after that. She also had a way of measuring me against husbands of her friends, men I'd barely met, compiled into an imaginary checklist I could not satisfy. I knew I wasn't perfect. I also knew I wasn't reckless. To her, those truths never mattered. Eventually, I stopped trying to measure up to what only existed in comparisons. So earlier that evening, when she said divorce, it should have wrecked me. But in the steam of that shower, I realized I wasn't shattered, or even sad. I was relieved. The words didn't crush, they released. For the first time in forever, I wasn't performing a repair on something that refused to be fixed. I could stop pretending. When I stepped out, fingers wrinkled and skin warmed, the weight in my chest had eased. I toweled off in silence, pulled on a clean shirt, and went straight to the bed. I didn't say goodnight. There was nothing else to say. I turned off the light, lay down, and sleep found me fast. The morning after she asked for a divorce, I woke early and made coffee like always, taking it slow. I wasn't organizing a plan to fix us. My mind was sketching how to move on. After a few minutes, I walked into the kitchen where she sat, scrolling, and said, "I'll need a few days. I want my lawyer to review the paperwork before I sign." She nodded. "That's fine." From that point, her behavior changed almost immediately. Within days, she stopped coming home some nights. When she did, she came in late. She left for girls' nights dressed like she was 20 again. I didn't need a private investigator to decode it. I watched the last cracks widen into daylight. What we'd had was already gone. This was beyond any repair I could offer. When my attorney finished reviewing the documents, he laid it out. Honestly, this can be done quietly. We didn't own a home. We were renters. No kids. No real joint savings. What we'd had, she'd moved out months earlier. The car was still financed. Aside from some kitchen appliances, there was nothing worth a fight. He suggested a couple of minor adjustments to keep surprises from biting later. I appreciated it. I wasn't out to win. I was out to be done. When I circled back to Selena with my response, she looked surprised I wasn't trying to pull her back. Across the table, her eyes searched for something. Maybe she'd expected pleading, a speech, a collapse. I didn't give it. She tested the water. "So, you're not even going to fight for us?" I leaned back, took a steady breath, and answered without blinking. "No. There's nothing to fight for if you've already decided. You want out, Selena. I'm just stepping aside." For the longest time, I had been the one patching silence, smoothing over cold shoulders, pretending the emotional distance wasn't wearing me down to the nub. Something inside shifted months before she ever said the word, divorce. I had already started grieving this marriage while still living in it. So when she finally pulled the trigger, I wasn't shocked. I was relieved. I could breathe again. Before the last meeting with the lawyer, before signatures hit paper, before she agreed to the final adjustments, I quietly signed a lease on a new place. I boxed what was mine and moved it one trip at a time. No dramatics. The day after she agreed to terms, I was gone. My things out. My side of the closet empty. I wasn't waiting around for pointless escalation. I had no interest in replaying old arguments. The split was straightforward. A few signatures, a handful of administrative steps, and within a month the divorce was finalized. It surprised me how easy it was to dissolve something that had once felt like the center of a world. But maybe that's the lesson. I had let go emotionally long before the law caught up. For the first time in months, I could sit in a room that felt like mine, on terms I chose, without walking on eggshells or pretending that quiet meant peace. I didn't have to explain anything to anyone. I could simply exist. That sounds simple, but when a relationship turns every ounce of calm into a negotiation, that kind of silence is gold. People sometimes ask why I didn't leave earlier, why I waited for her to say it. The truth is, I didn't want to carry the guilt of being the one who bailed. I didn't want to spend years wondering if I gave up too soon. I needed to know I had done my part. She kept pushing, blaming, escalating, until she finally said, "Let's end it." I'm not ashamed to admit I thanked her for the clarity. Her decision gave me permission to stop fighting for something that had already fallen apart. I didn't expect to cross paths with anyone from her circle again. I assumed her friends would erase me or treat me like an obvious villain and move on. So when I ran into her best friend of all people, I braced for the cold shoulder or a sideways comment. Instead, the opposite happened. It was a grocery store parking lot, bags on my forearms, new apartment a few blocks away from where her friend lives. I heard my name softly turned, and there she was. She used to visit us sometimes. I never had the sense she was on my side. Now she looked at me like she actually saw the person and not the role. "I heard about the divorce," she said. "I'm sorry it ended that way. You didn't deserve that." I stood there, unsure how to answer. It was so unexpected that my feelings stalled. Then she added, "Honestly, Adrian, you were always good to her. Some of us noticed." She didn't know how lucky she was. That hit harder than I thought it would, maybe because it was the first time anyone from that side acknowledged I wasn't crazy or cruel, that I had tried. Then, to my surprise, she offered help, asked if I needed anything, even helped setting up the new place. I thanked her, but said no. I didn't want blurred lines or a new complication. I was still finding my footing, and my space needed to be mine. Still, that small exchange planted a seed. If her best friend, someone tight with Selena, could see my side plainly, what had really been happening behind the scenes? What had Selena been saying about me? Were they all on her side, or had they simply watched it fracture and stayed quiet? The kindness made me question dynamics I hadn't noticed while I was busy holding the roof up. 6 months after the papers, I'd just begun to feel a rhythm. Out of nowhere, a message arrived from Selena. "Do you ever feel like maybe we rushed things?" My first reaction wasn't anger or confusion, it was stillness. Something had shifted on her end. I hadn't left any room for misunderstandings when we split. I asked her to clarify. She asked to meet. I resisted at first, then agreed to a public cafe. She opened up, said she'd been replaying everything. Me, the ending, and the person who had encouraged her to pull the trigger. Her best friend, the same one I'd seen in the parking lot, warm and understanding, had been whispering in her ear about what she deserved, how other women had it better, and why settling was a mistake. What Selena didn't know was that the same friend had been friendly with me a week after we separated. If I'd allowed it, she'd likely have been in my apartment. I kept my distance and never entertained it. Selena said she finally saw her best friend, without the mask. Since the divorce, they'd spent more time together, enough for cracks to show. The stories about her generous, affectionate husband. Fiction. The man barely let her speak. He was loud, dismissive, undermining her in front of others. Selena watched her friend shrink around him. The same woman who'd lectured about independence couldn't finish a sentence at home. That's when guilt rushed in. "I spent so much time comparing you to an imaginary version of her husband," she told me, "and you were the one actually showing up, doing the work, trying to keep us together." I stayed quiet and listened. Then came the question I half expected, unsure I'd ever hear. "Do you think there's any way we could try again?" I looked at her and said, "No, I don't want to go back." It wasn't meant to wound. It was clarity. I finally understood what peace feels like. She sat there, saying the lines I had begged to hear once. "I miss you. I didn't know how good I had it. I made a mistake. Maybe months ago those words would have broken me open. Now they echoed in an empty room. The truth is, I've grown to enjoy the quiet. I've learned to value my own company. No tension waiting behind a door. No silent treatment over dinner. No emotional tug-of-war every time I try to speak plainly. I sleep without feeling a storm roll in beside me. That kind of peace isn't something I'm willing to trade. I told her I wasn't angry, and I didn't want to hurt her. I told her I was done. I had twisted myself into knots to keep something intact that didn't want to be held. Stepping away showed me how much of myself I had lost while trying. I have that part back, and I will not misplace it again. She tried to catalog our good days. I reminded her of the nights I came home feeling invisible. She promised she would change. I said every chance to do that existed when it mattered. I am not a backup plan. I am not a comfort zone you return to when other options collapse. In the end, I wished her well, and I meant it. That chapter is closed. I'm good with that.